Hey guys, I'm Zilla, and today we're going to be going over the first tier that you'll see in Kaiju Assault, Tier 1. Tier 1 is an interesting tier, as it's very helpful for beginners because of their versatility. However, they do have disadvantages, but by far, the best tier that you'll be wanting to use if you want to learn the ropes of Kaiju Assault. Tier 1 has a cost of 3 points, so if you're playing anything from 10 to 15, 3 is one of the small. It's obviously the smallest cost that you'll need to get any monster you want to get, obviously being Tier 1. Now, let's go over our best in class. Best in class is going to be part where I will talk about the monsters that have the best outputs in terms of different attributes to help you if you get these cards when drawing. Now, with health, the monster with the most health is Iron King with 725 HP. So he's a tank for being a tier 1. However, he can stand up to most other monsters in higher tiers. However, when it comes to the bigger tiers, he'll still get knocked out pretty easily. So if you're dealing with more mid-level tiers, he's pretty good. It can help tank a lot. Also, with a lot of his attack options, he's pretty good for a monster of such a low tier. Speaking of attack options, Yongari is a monster with the most attack options. With Fire Breath, Cutting Laser, a Grab, and Melee, he's a pretty good, well-rounded monster. He doesn't have any specific abilities, per se, which I will get into with other monsters, but with so many options he can use for attacks, grabbing to stop enemy movements and presses, he's a very good monster to have if you draw him. The monster with the most attack output for a single attack is Varan. In this class, his gliding fall has 350 damage, so as such, getting that off is pretty good if you're facing other monsters within the same tier. So, I'd say that's very good. Another monster with a similar attack range is Helena with a Fireball of 350, so both him and Varan both output a lot of good damage, and both having 600 HP, they're pretty bar minimum when it comes to HP, but having a very strong damage for this tier. Now, moving on, I want to talk about certain abilities that certain monsters have. With Iron King has his counter, which is an activated ability in which Iron King is attacked. Roll 2 die, and if both rolls are even, that attack is considered a miss, and the attacker takes 50 damage. So that counter is a very good counter, so that also makes Iron King's defenses even bulkier. So really, if you get this card, you've picked a tank. Now, Helena also has an interesting ability with his Sonic Bubble. It's a Desperation Instant Hit ability where you remove Helena and the target from play until the end of your next turn, then roll 8 die and deal damage equal to the total number times 20 to the target. So that's another interesting ability and will help you a great deal. And with Helena having a pretty good damage output for his class, I'd say he's one of the best monsters to get if you ever draw him within the first tier. Now moving on, I want to talk about Distraction. Distraction is one of my favorite abilities, and it also comes from some of the best monsters and one of the most least liked monsters within the series, Minion Magra. Magra is a pretty good monster, having his 200 damage for his eye beams, which is a pretty respectable damage for his class, and Minion not having the same thing with only a power ring of 150 being his highest damaging attack. Even though he has a heat beam, that's a desperation move that will only be activated within a lower amount of health. So as such, Minion's not going to be putting out that much damage, but his Distraction and Magra's Distraction are what really sell these cards, because with Distraction, almost all attacks that you will land will always be instant hits. So pretty much you don't need the instant hit ability type thing right there next to the name for them to hit, which is really awesome, because if you mix this low tier with a high tier like Godzilla 2000, for example, who has a very high damaging fire breath, or heat beam I should say, then you'll be landing a lot of damage on other monsters, making these monsters very good versatile support characters. Moving on to another ability is Zilla and Kumonga's Reflexes. Reflexes works when any monster is hit, roll a die, and if the number is even, treat the attack as a miss instead. So really, if you pick either of these two monsters, they can help you because you'll have a second chance at making sure you don't get hit. However, because Zilla and Kumonga have 400 and 500 damage respectively for their HP, it is very likely that almost anything from a higher tier monster will probably kill them in one shot or two. So even though they have that good reflex ability, they're still at risk to getting KO'd in 1 or 2 shots from high level monsters. So be careful of that. However, they are definitely very versatile. Moving on, I want to talk about grab abilities. The monsters here are obviously Gabra, Manda, and Gazora. Gazora being one of my favorite monsters. And with Manda has his coil. He's the only monster within this class to have coil, and it acts as a grab. And any monster attacked by the coil, the Kaiju will hit Manda instead. So what that means is that if you hit a monster, if you're trying to hit a monster and Manda's coiled, the thing is that if you miss, and you'll hit your own monster, which kind of sucks, and that will end your coil. However, you need to be very careful of that. But the thing is that coil will work over time and is similar to the poison effects found in certain Pokemon, such as Poison Sting and such. So be very careful of that. But Mana can rack up a lot of damage similar to Poison if you keep him on a monster and have him coiled. Another is Grab Whips. This attack can only be used against Kaiju currently grabbed by Gezora. This attack does not end the grab. So you can go into a grab into his Grab Whips. So that's a 250 damage if you land both of those attacks. So Gezora with that 250 damage with 700 health is pretty respectable for damage. Gabra, even though he's one of the weirdest looking monsters, he has a very good setup in terms of his kit. Having a melee of 300, electric hands of 200 times 2, so that's going to be 400 damage. However, you won't be landing those, of course, if you miss one and only hit one, so that's only 200 damage. However, his shock ability is what really sells this card. Shock is when Gabra is grabbed another monster, that Kaiju takes 75 damage, so that's even more than I thought. 25? Nope, 75. And that's when he's grabbed by another Kaiju. So that's the thing, is that if you get hit, if that monster grabs you, or if you get hit, there's a good chance that you might not get KO'd, and they might get KO'd instead if they miss and hit their own Kaiju, because you dealt 75 damage, so if they needed just a little bit more damage to be knocked off of them, so that they could get KO'd by their own teammates, that helps a lot, making Gabra also a very versatile card. Next, I'm going to be going over more defensive abilities. Starting off, I'm going to look at Sedora. Sedora is probably one of my favorite monsters to use in this tier, having 700 HP, making him one of the best monsters in terms of HP this tier, although obviously lower than Iron King. His melee with 250 is pretty nice. His pinchers with 150 each is pretty nice as well. However, his fog is what sells him as well. After using fog, Kaiju must roll an additional die to hit Sedora. This effect lasts for 4 turns. So this is very similar to Trick Room, but not exactly, because with fog, they have to roll an additional die, so it's pretty much an upgraded reflex. So if you get this instead of reflexes, that's pretty good, and it helps even more. So setting up with Sedora on your first turn with fog is one of the best things you can do for this monster, because he can deal a lot of damage, even for his low tier damage. Next, we're going to move on to Kamacuras. Kamacuras is pretty nice because of his camouflage ability, and after using camouflage, Kaiju must roll an additional die to hit Kamacuras. This effect ends when Kamacuras is hit. So this is even an even more upgraded version of reflexes in fog, because if you have bad luck, then you're never going to hit Kamacuras, and he can just keep hitting you with his slash for 200 damage, which is also pretty respectable, but Kamacuras suffers from his low HP. With 350, the same as Minya, so the fact is that he can get one-shotted pretty easily by higher level tiered monsters. Swarm is another interesting ability he has, which is a desperation move, which you search the tier 3 pile and replace this card with Kamacuras Swarm and remove damage and effects. Kamacuras Swarm is another monster I'll be looking at in the tier 3 pile, however I will not be going over it in this video, and will be going over it in the tier 3 pile. So, Kamacuras is an interesting monster because he is the first monster that you will see to have a desperation into a new monster card. Now, Toto is the last monster I'm going to be talking about when it comes to defensive abilities, and that is his Shill ability. This is very similar to the Gamera of higher tiers, and Toto, being a lower tier monster, is very good to have this ability. With 500 HP, he's pretty reasonable when it comes to tanking, however his Shell is what really sells it. When Toto takes 100 less damage from attacks, and damage cannot be reduced below 50. So the fact is that any monster that tries to reduce this ability, it can't do it below 50, and the fact is that his 100 damage, he'll take 100 less damage each time you attack him. So really, if you have an attack that does, like, say, 150, that's only 50 damage you're doing to Toto. And with 500 HP, that's going to take a long time to whittle down this big turtle. Now, I'm going to move on to the more unique abilities. Let's go look up first with Scopadillo. He has his roll ability. This is obviously very similar to the rollout in the Pokemon games, however it has no typing, so there's no stab to worry about. With roll, if you miss the attack and defensive curl effects, while under defensive curl effects, this attack you may only use. So the fact is that the roll, you can just keep using that over and over again. However, the fact is that you just can't, if you miss, you're out of that damage output, and you'll have to start it all over again. And that's where it runs in very well its defensive curl. With the defensive curl, when attacked, before a dice is rolled, you may choose to take no damage. You cannot use this ability if it is in effect last turn. So the fact is that's a balancing, so that of course you can't just keep doing that over and over again so that you can stall up matches. However, with melee of 275 and an HP of 700, he's a very good monster to have both his rollout and defensive curl. Both really good Pokemon moves in my opinion as well. Now, Another monster here is Metachesis. Metachesis is one of the newer monsters that was added into this tier. However, he's a very interesting monster with his microwave grab with 200 damage, his grab of 50, and his ram of 150. So with 550 HP, he's pretty reasonable in terms of this tier. However, it's his gravity shift ability that really sells him. When Metachesis is attacked, roll a dice. If you roll 2 above the number of times, Metachesis has been attacked without being hit. This attack is considered a miss. So it's very similar to reflexes in Fog. However, you have to roll 2 die, making the odds of your opponent hitting you even less. So it's pretty much similar to Sand Attack in my opinion, and should be used very willingly and pretty much as possible so that you can keep up your versatility and keep up your chances of surviving with Metachesis. Now, the last monster I'm going to be looking at within this tier is Pudgy Pig, probably the most unique monster of this tier. With 450 HP, he's not the monster you're going to tank with, however, he's not the weakest monster here. I'm going to be going over all of his attacks, with his Gobble being at 150. Pudgy Pig gives half the damage dealt as HP. If a Kaiju is defeated by this attack, add 1 use to Digest. Now let's go over to Digest. And right here, increase Munch's effect by 50, increase Gobble's damage by 100, and that works in tandem with his Munch. Pudgy Pig's current and max HP both increase by 50 at the end of your turn, so pretty much he's a very fat monster. He's just going to keep eating over and over again, and that's going to increase his HP output, and the Digest will also increase to his Munch and Gobble. So pretty much all his abilities work in super good tandem, and that makes this monster a beast if you let him stay on the field. Because the fact is that he's just going to keep increasing his HP, turning him from a mediocre tank to a monster tank that can tank some of even the most powerful monsters like Space Godzilla, Biollante, and Destroya. So really, you don't want to keep this monster out on the field if it's played against you. In terms of how to play with this tier, I'd say if you want to commit to this tier well and use as many low tiers as possible. Most of these monsters have very unique abilities, and as such, you really want to use them to the best of your abilities. So if you get monsters like Helena and Yagari and Varen and Minya, use your distraction along with your other abilities and use as much damage as possible to whittle down your opponent's HP. So facing higher tiers, you want to focus all your attacks on a single monster to whittle that one down, while your opponent struggles with his other monsters to whittle all of your monsters down. Because when using this tier, you're always going to have more monsters on your side. So always be wary of that, but be careful because higher tier monsters can easily one-shot most of your monsters if you're not careful. So that's my review of the first tier. Stay tuned for the next tiers. See you guys.